Welcome to the July Business of Alt Protein seminar. Today, we're going to dive into insights and strategies for plant-based companies to win in the food service sector. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Marika Azoff, and I'm the Corporate Engagement Lead at GFI US. So I work with large food service companies and culinary institutions and trade associations to really help them understand opportunities in the alternative protein sector. I also support large food service companies in successfully integrating alternative proteins into their business strategies. And I'm joined by several phenomenal guests today. My colleague Kimberly is behind the scenes making everything work. So thank you, Kimberly. And as soon as I'm done introducing this seminar, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Ben Pierce, who is GFI's research analyst. And Ben's going to spend about 10 minutes sharing some food service sales data and consumer insights from GFI's latest U.S. plant-based food service market report. Kimberly's going to paste that in the chat for those of you who haven't seen that report. It is U.S. only. Highly recommend taking a look at it if you haven't seen it already. We've been purchasing food service sales data for the last 2 years and always want your feedback and engagement with these reports. So after Ben shares that data, we're going to launch into a panel discussion with our 3 panelists. We have Jennifer DiFrancesco from Sodexo, Edwina Hughes from World Resources Institute, and Alex Weissman from Palate Insights. And I'm going to formally introduce them in a couple of minutes. And then following the panel discussion, we'll have plenty of time for your questions. So before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. You're probably all familiar with the Good Food Institute, but for those of you who are kind of newer to our work, we're an international nonprofit organization that is developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. So we identify the most effective solutions, we mobilize resources and talent, and we empower partners across the food system to make alternative proteins more accessible, affordable, delicious, and to create a world in which alternative proteins are no longer alternative. Second, this webinar is going to be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, along with all of our other Business of Alt Protein seminars. If you haven't accessed that yet, it's a great library of a ton of information. Also, everyone who's in this call, everyone who's registered is going to receive a copy of the recording in their inbox. And lastly, very importantly, we want your questions all throughout as they arise in your brain. So please, please, please look down at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little Q&A box. Add your questions there. Do not add them in the chat. Kimberly's going to be moderating the Q&A box and monitoring. And so we'll be sure to answer those questions, as many as we can get to live at the end of the seminar, but ask them throughout so that you're putting them in there when they're top of mind. All right, so without further ado, I will hand things over to Ben.
Thanks, Marika. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know for any reason if you can't see that here, but we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So, thank you, Marika. My name is Ben Pierce. I'm the Senior Market Research Analyst at Good Food Institute. I'm excited to share some highlights from the report that Marika mentioned. So here is that report. You can find it at that link on the page, as well as Kimberly posted it in the chat as well. But this report highlights food service sales data that GFI commissioned alongside PBFA from Circana. So we leverage their supply track database, which captures broadline distributor sales directly to operators. So that's an important note as we kind of go through some of the highlights here, that this data does sit one level removed from the end food service consumer, but nonetheless provides a valuable look into the trends of the sector. Additionally, it includes some consumer insights section that looks at the latest trends in plant-based and food service. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and dive into some of the highlights, starting with sales. So the food service channel as a whole saw a major sales shift in 2020 due to the impacts of COVID-19 and the impacts that had on consumer purchasing behavior. Since then, food categories across the sector have worked their way back from pre-pandemic levels of 2019, although not without challenges. So here we can see the plant-based proteins category and conventional meat, and we kind of see that trend playing out with both of them, seeing sales dips in 2020, but rebounding in recent years. For both of these categories, we see that sales kind of have fluctuated modestly in the latest year, 2023. But when we compare back to 2019, which we can see in those kind of yellow boxes below each graph, we see that there's quite a large gap between dollar sales growth and pound sales growth. So this signals the role that price increases have played across both of these categories, and something that we've seen across both the retail and the food service channel as a whole. And this is one of those challenges that has been impacting the food sector over the recent years. So with this, we do see that conventional meat, the gap there is a bit more pronounced, signaling that price increases have impacted that category a bit more. But despite this, plant-based products do still sit at a premium in the food service channel as well as in retail. So that remains an opportunity for the category to close that gap going forward. For plant-based protein specifically, we've seen meat alternatives meant to replicate the taste, texture, and experience of conventional meat, or analogs, as we kind of note them here, rise to make up the majority of sales in this plant-based proteins category over the recent years. Meanwhile, grain nut veggie products like bean burgers, for example, have seen declines, while tofu and tempeh still plays a meaningful role in the category. So this data here seems to highlight that there is a consumer desire for products that can match the conventional meat experience. Nonetheless, diversification and experimentation are both, of course, important in terms of expanding options and reaching consumers with different needs and expectations. Now, looking into three emerging segments within this category, they do happen to fall into that analog segment. So those are plant-based pork patties, chicken nuggets, and chicken tenders, all of which we can see here grew pound sales relatively significantly in 2023. So kind of that dark green bar for each segment there. And then even more so versus 2019, albeit off of relatively small bases back in 2019. So this highlights an important difference between retail and food service. While in retail, we've seen a significant expansion into new formats and product types, food service appears to just be recently broadening the scope of the category within plant-based proteins and specifically within analog products. So with that, operators that go beyond the traditional one and done kind of plant-based patty option will be important to taking this category from niche to norm. Now, this slide here breaks down the share of the plant-based protein category sales by food service segment. So we can see a large share of sales came from QSR, quick service restaurants, followed by full service restaurants, education, and then other non-commercial environments. Two notable segments here are education and healthcare. After pandemic-driven declines in 2020, both have seen a significant rebound with sales well eclipsing pre-pandemic levels of 2019, and also grew significantly in 2023 as well. Now, one note here is that broadline distributor sales do tend to skew towards non-commercial, but nonetheless, quick service restaurants, full service restaurants that are leveraging broadline distributors are also captured here. So speaking of healthcare and education in food service, we see that tailwinds are pretty strong in these segments as operators like the ones on this screen have made some impressive commitments in this space. So a few examples include Sodexo, Aramark, a handful of college universities, healthcare systems that are committing to a certain percentage of plant-based menu items, whether that be by 2025, 2026, et cetera. So these commitments set an example for other food service management companies to prioritize plant-based options, which can help them meet their sustainability goals and appeal to a consumer base with interest in plant-based foods. So now let's take a look at some of the consumer insights from the report and insights that are driving some of these trends that we're seeing in food service. So in October 2023 survey of 1,500 US respondents by Dig Insights, there was a partnership with GFI as well as PBFA, found that roughly a quarter of respondents stated that they had ordered a dish including plant-based meat at a restaurant in the past 6 months. So this, noting this just to underscore that there does appear to be a clear consumer interest in these dishes, with a sizable portion of consumers reporting having purchased them in recent months. Despite this, from the same study that I just mentioned, and what you can see on this slide here, barriers to purchase still remain. So in that same survey, we see that taste, namely texture and cost concerns, were reported as the leading reasons for not ordering a dish that includes plant-based meat at a restaurant. So what might motivate consumers to purchase plant-based options in a food service setting? When asked what would encourage consumers to select plant-forward options, a Data Essentials report found that using flavors they love and having the opportunity to sample products first were the top selected reasons. So it's no surprise that from the last slide, as we saw, taste was the top barrier. Focusing on the flavor experience with the product itself and showcasing that to consumers is key to driving appeal to these products and plant-based products in general. From that same report, we also see that familiarity ranks pretty high in terms of motivating or motivators to purchasing plant-forward options. The emerging formats discussed earlier, like plant-based pork patties, chicken nuggets, chicken tenders, are examples of operators broadening their offerings into familiar formats, which can help lower the barrier to trial for consumers who are familiar with these formats. On the other hand, novelty and uniqueness also appear to be important. So Mintel found that having unique dishes, having new menu items can motivate consumers to trying a restaurant in general. So with that, striking the balance between familiarity and novelty appears to be an important lever for companies to pull in driving appeal to plant-based offerings and also keeping them engaged in the long term. And then finally, menuing strategies are another important opportunity for operators and manufacturers to optimize. So one example here includes making the plant-based option the default, as major operators like Burger King and Starbucks have tested in the past. For example, instead of the burger on the menu being beef with the option to substitute for a plant-based patty, it would be plant-based with the option to substitute for beef. In a study of student dining hall purchases put on by the contributors you can see here, uptake of plant-based dishes rose from 31% in the control to 82% in the default setting when in the universities that implemented the default consistently throughout the study. So this strategy is compelling for operators who are, again, looking to drive purchases of plant-based menu items to hit sustainability targets, reach a valuable plant-based shopper, or just keep consumers engaged through having a variety of options. So to recap, 3 opportunity areas for plant-based manufacturers and operators to focus on include focusing on flavor to drive appeal, striking that balance between familiarity and novelty to lower the barrier to trial while also keeping consumers engaged, and then testing and optimizing menu strategies to draw consumers into plant-based offerings. So with that, I'm excited to pass it back to Marika and our panel to continue the conversation on plant-based in food service.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Again, all of that info and more without the beautiful voiceover and slides is in our report that Kimberly linked in the chat. As a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We will get to them at the end, but just want to make sure they're all in that one spot. All right, so as we transition into the panel discussion, I'll have my panelists come on camera and formally introduce them. So we have Jennifer DiFrancesco, who is the Director of Culinary Innovation for Sodexo Campus, leading the development of crave-worthy student menus using insights and innovations to transform dining on campus today and tomorrow. I can attest to the crave-worthiness. You never leave a convo with Jen and don't want to eat a lot of ice cream, plant-based ice cream. Prior to this position, Jennifer was the culinary program manager for the Humane Society of the United States. And today, Jennifer continues to drive plant-based developments and sustainability actions through Sodexo campus menus with a goal of helping achieve the company's campus commitments to make 50% of menu offerings plant-based by 2025, which Jen will talk about in a bit. Then we have Edwina Hughes, who's a sustainable food systems specialist. Edwina is the head of Cool Food at the World Resources Institute. Previously, she led the corporate responsibility function for Sodexo in the UK and Ireland. The Sodexo family is here. In her current role, Edwina acts as a trusted advisor to member organizations on their sustainable food commitments. And alongside strategic relationship management, Edwina leverages World Resources Institute's considerable environmental and behavioral science insights to inspire practical action among the cool food community. Fun fact, Edwina lives on the south coast of England, and really fun fact is a year-round sea swimmer, which I am jealous of. You must have a really good wetsuit. And last but not least, we have Alex Weissman, who's the founder and CEO of Palate Insights, which has really been a lifeline to the plant-based world. Palate Insights is an agile, authentic product feedback platform using both consumer and chef insights to accelerate the adoption of sustainable foods. Through Palate's chef panel, brands can connect with over 150 executive chefs across food service verticals, across cuisines and geographies to develop their innovation pipeline, improve their formulation, and refine their go-to-market strategy, also improve their sales. And through their restaurant and grocer pulse, they bring brands into the real world to conduct consumer testing through their network of over 40 restaurant and grocery partners. And prior to founding Palate, Alex was at McKinsey, where he served clients in their sustainability practices. Impressive group of panelists today. Thank you all so much for giving your time to GFI and all of those current and future listeners on this webinar. So we're going to launch into the first question. We've seen food service players over the years embrace plant-based proteins and incorporate them into their menus to varying degrees of success over the years. And I'd love to hear from you all, what are the top reasons why food service companies are motivated to increase their plant-based options and sales today? And all of you either work for or with a food service company who is motivated in these ways. So we'll start with you, Edwina. You want to kick it off?
Thanks, Marika. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here today. So from my point of view in the World Resources Institute as head of Cool Food, I know that food service organizations are really keen to respond to market trends, and there has been a growing interest in plant-rich diets, which will feature plant-based proteins. So whether that's tempeh or tofu or analog proteins. And what we have in Cool Food is a global movement of food service organizations who recognize the climate impact of animal-based products. And what they're doing is they're seeking to reduce that climate impact. So as a result, they're really interested in foods that are able to satisfy the function of protein without the climate implications that meat presents. So just for a bit of context, Cool Food is a global movement of restaurants, universities, hospitals, contract caterers, and all sorts of organizations that are serving food at scale. So we have about 70 organizations in the movement, and they're tracking and seeking to reduce their emissions from food year on year in line with the Paris Agreement aligned target. So serving more plant-based proteins helps these food service organizations to reduce their emissions from their food. Organizations will join Cool Food for the data analysis that we provide, for the accountability and clarity that creates for them. We're a trusted third-party organization. We're confirming their climate footprint and their reduction results. The fact that we now have a number of organizations from each sector allows us to advise and suggest based on what they're all doing in each sector, and that benefits all the members. So we're using behavioral science to inform their thinking and help them to implement strategies that will reduce the climate impact of the food they serve. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later about those behavioral techniques when they relate particularly to plant-based proteins.
Thanks, Edwina. So it sounds like consumer-driven, consumer demand, responding to consumer demand, and also environmental factors, sustainability goals. Really quickly, do you notice a difference in those motivators across different countries? Like in the UK or in Europe, is it more sustainability driven? In the US, is it more like, I'm curious if you noticed a difference.
It has to be both. I think it has to be, consumers have to want it. So I think organizations need to feel like there's a pull coming from consumers. And I think then there's a kind of I think that sustainability reporting has become a hygiene factor for food service organizations. I think if they aren't making an effort to try and track and reduce their emissions from food, they're seen as regressive or not quite, market leaders because they're behind the pack, because this has become something that you're expected to do. So the sweet spot is where you've got both of those things in play. And I think that's true in Europe and in the US and elsewhere.
Yeah. Jen, do you want to take it from here and talk a little bit about the why behind some of Sodexo's commitments and motivation?
Of course, yes. First of all, thank you for having me, Marika and GFI. It's always fun to be here. But I have to tell you, I am so proud that Sodexo understands the impact of our food choices that they have on our health and our environment. It's honestly why we're leading the charge with this innovative dining solutions that prioritize plant-based ingredients. Interestingly enough, in our fiscal year 2020, we found that through internal analysis that 70% of our company's US food supply carbon footprint was related to animal-based food purchases. So increasing those numbers of plant-based and plant-focused options on menus is part of our company's plan to reduce the global carbon footprint by 34% by 2025. Now, also globally, our goal is to transform the dining experience by introducing menus composed of 33% plant-based options also by 2025. However, we've seen a greater demand from our Gen Z population, with 37% of this generation seeking to eat more plant-based foods and reducing their animal meat consumption. This opportunity has led us to make the incredible North American campus goal of 50% plant-based entrees by 2025. And we've come to realize that whether it's the reason is for one's wellness, planet health, animal welfare, or just wanting to try new and exciting foods, we really truly understand the importance of having these inclusive and equitable options available throughout our menus. So we're actively working towards that goal by training our chefs, working with great partners like the Humane Society of the United States, obviously creating delicious plant-based recipes and promoting those options to our consumers.
Thanks, Jen. So I hear health, obviously consumer demand, and really focusing on where the consumer demand is highest. Yes. Campus and university segments, and obviously the big one, global sustainability goals. Alex, I know you're working on the ground with some really specific food service companies who are interested in the plant-based sector. I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, thanks, Marika, and thank you, GFI, for having me. So excited to share this panel as well with two amazing panelists. So it's great to hear your answers, and thank you to all the attendees who've joined today. But yes, as Marika alluded to, Palette has a chef panel of executive chefs who we connect with brands to help them get feedback on their products and launch. And we leaned on that panel in preparation of today's panel to try and tease out and understand a little bit what they thought to some of these questions. And I think we saw like a very clear, resounding answer from our panel, which tended to look a little bit more towards the commercial sector. So like fast casual restaurants, all that. And I think we see a theme in the commercial sector, which is around economics, and specifically when it comes to why do they want to add plant-based options to their menus, it's all about meeting guest needs. Frankly, none of them selected taste or quality, and that's something that we all want to work on, but there still is consumer demand for these products. And they did repeatedly call out the importance of both, one, bringing in new customers or meeting existing customer preferences. And I'd encourage you to use that language when speaking with operators, because for them, that's all about traffic, right? How do we get more people into our restaurants? And so there's a key lever around both guest retention and guest attraction there. I think perhaps a little bit less intuitive to your average commercial restaurant. There's also an opportunity to increase ticket size. And so for better or worse, plant-based options are often sold at a premium to conventional meat options, and an even larger premium to existing vegetarian options. And again, this is going to be less initially obvious to a smaller commercial operator, But if you're previously selling a black bean burger for $8 and a beef burger for $10, but now you're selling, a plant-based meat burger for $12, if you have guests opting for that black bean burger before, now they're gone from $8 to $12, you get to increase your ticket size 50% from that guest. And that's a pretty meaningful lift for a smaller restaurant operator. And it's going to more than cover the cost of the additional ingredient. So I think just to wrap up, I would recommend speaking to restaurants in the language and especially what's going to be on their mind, which is going to be restaurant economics. And luckily, I think plant-based ingredients have a really exciting story to tell about guest attraction, retention, increasing ticket size.
Thank you. I love that you ran that panel for us and polled your chefs in preparation. Thank you for doing that. And it's so interesting. Yeah, the different motivators from different food service segments, right? Different size restaurants. We're talking about a massive global corporation versus maybe a restaurant with 1 or 2 units. There are different motivators. So I think it's so valuable to hear from all of you about what those are. And really, really excellent little tips, Alex. Keep those coming. So I imagine we have a lot of folks representing alternative protein, plant-based companies in the audience today. And I want to talk more about communicating, kind of along this thread, communicating with food service operators. So how can plant-based companies effectively position their products to meet these diverse needs of food service operators? And what key factors should they consider when crafting their marketing and positioning strategies? So really thinking about also like what problems can plant-based proteins help solve for these operators? And Alex, you teed us up perfectly by already talking about some of these. And I'd love to start with you, Jen, as an operator who is approached by so many of these companies. Kind of what should they be considering when they reach out to a company like Sodexo?
Yeah. When our team is approached by companies, one of the first things we seek to understand is what problem it does solve for. So you're spot on there, right? It's like, what are these gaps that we're looking to solve for, and how does this fit the need? I really think with plant-based companies, we should evaluate the product and understand what truly differentiates it to stand out and possibly fill these gaps for food service operators. And know that those gaps will be different for every operator, though. Is this something that can reduce labor? Does this have multiple uses for menu application? Is it allergen friendly? How long is the shelf life? Is this a ready-to-use item? Can this item replace something that is more expensive without altering satisfaction? When it comes to plant-based products, there are more and more innovations coming to market each year, and we want to stay on top of what's out there. So yearly, we hold a plant-based blind cutting. It's lovingly referred to as Plantapalooza. Marika, I think you're familiar. Yep. It's where we receive samples from all sorts of companies and organize them by category and have these blind tastings with regional and corporate chefs from across segments to score these individual products side by side for our qualitative analysis. And I think this process helps us truly evaluate the products that are out there and then prioritize those gaps for what we're looking to solve for.
Very helpful. So I'm curious, how does a company become part of Plantapalooza?
Honestly, there's a lot of companies that are just reaching out to us. And at first we were trying them like individually, and we're like, you know what, there's just so many that are coming and we want to reach all of them. So that's why we just started doing the yearly Plantapalooza. So honestly, whether they reach us by email, LinkedIn, carrier pigeon, we'll find a way and we'll put you on the list if you're interested.
Amazing. And I will say Jen and her colleagues, they're often at many of the trade shows walking around. Many of you may know her. So
usually have food in my mouth. Yes. Yeah.
And I think we're going to share some information with all of you on how best to reach these panelists after. So I'll have that in your inbox. And I think the importance of sampling is something I just hear over and over and over and over again. So it's really good to bring up. And I know so many companies are just eager to get their samples in the hands of Sodexo. So super helpful to know that there's a Plantapalooza. And just nitpicky question. When you're doing these cuttings, are you, since they're blind, I imagine, and I recall that you're obviously looking at taste, but how does cost and format and shelf stability, like, does that all come into play after or while you're evaluating them? Yeah, how does that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with the blind cutting, we'll just do the qualitative analysis and kind of rank everything up, and we'll have an overview of where everything ranked as far as the products. And then ones that we see opportunities for to move forward with, we'll go into the quantitative analysis and send that off to supply for pricing and cost and distribution and all those fun things.
Awesome.
I have the much more fun job of just trying all the foods.
Yeah, that sounds great. Edwina, wondering if you have anything to add. Also just understanding that a lot of the companies and institutions that you're working with are really coming at this from an environmental lens. And are they kind of looking at the sustainability of different proteins? Like what is important for plant-based companies to keep in mind when they're kind of working with some of the institutions and companies that are part of the Cool Food Pledge?
Well, I think I'm coming from a slightly different perspective to Jen. So we've collated a lot of research on behavioral techniques that shift consumers towards choosing more plant-rich options. And so if a plant rich product can respond to those techniques, I think they're onto a winner. And so the techniques, there are 90, so that's quite a few, but of those, there are 18 what we're calling no regret techniques. And taste and flavor comes out top. So Ben flagged this in the research that he cited in his presentation. You know, people are worried that it's not going to taste good. So I think if I was CEO of a plant-based product company, I would be thinking about how to mitigate that perception. And there are loads of ways to do that. It's in visuals, it's in the taste testing, like you say, it's in the marketing. So it's before the person has even kind of got to the product, because we have to evoke that sense that this is going to taste amazing. It's going to either replicate what it might have been. So if it was meant to have been beef or chicken, that you should feel satisfied that it is similar in that way, or if it's meant to be something else, great. And just thinking about how to respond to those techniques. So the techniques kind of that really kind of stand out for me are around taste and flavor. Yes, environmental credentials, and yes, local if you can make it. But when I think about, you know, plant-based proteins, the local story isn't really going to be relevant. The environmental story is great, but it'll never be the first thing that motivates people when they're thinking about what they want to eat. So I think it's the taste and flavor element that really still needs to, you know, hit the mark for the food service operators. They want to be very confident that the product is going to be delicious and that they can very seamlessly slide it into their food service, which is another point that I'm sure Jen has much more insight to.
Yeah, thanks, Edwina. For those of you who haven't seen World Resources Institute's marketing plant-based playbook, sorry, got the words in the wrong order, but we're going to send a link to it in the follow-up. We can also pop a link to it in a minute in the chat. It is a go-to resource for me. I send it to every food service company I work with. It's incredible, all science-based techniques. And I imagine it would be really valuable for a plant-based startup to come with some of those tools when they're approaching a new operator, saying like, this is a proven way to increase sales of plant-based proteins. Like, if you put this product on your menu, here are some really awesome strategies to help it, you know, sell. So incredible playbook. So grateful for that. And they just updated it. So I'm very excited. Alex, you already partially answered this question, but anything else to add?
Yeah, I really like what Edwina said around taste and flavor too. Yeah, that's a lot of the work Palette does in that space. Like, how do we improve the taste and flavor of these products? And when we do surveying on the drivers and barriers, where we measure it implicitly through their actual decision making, we see, taste being the number one driver, and health price up there as well. But sustainability is really important can be important at the operator level for like depending on the type of operator, especially for like Jen at Sodexo, for instance. But what's nice about taste and flavor is that tends to flow through down to the consumer, as well. So I really like that. I think from our side, I meant as when it comes to marketing and positioning strategies, it's a lot of what I mentioned earlier in the commercial sector around, how do you drive guest traffic or higher ticket size, and in non-com, there's gonna be broader mandates around environmental goals or health at play. But I do think at the end of the day, it really pays to understand the unique needs of any given food service vertical that you're selling to because of the variation across verticals. And so, for instance, we spoke to an executive chef in the K through 12 sector in preparation, and what struck me about her answer was the specificity around it. So just to read what she said, familiarize yourself with the nutritional guidelines that are required for the National School Lunch Program, and have product information that includes meat alternative counts that we need to build our menus, understand the top allergies that schools try to avoid, and produce products that do not have them. A popular brand uses coconut as a binder in their products, and because we are a nut-free program, we'll never be able to offer that product. And I think the specificity in her answer to me just, again, reiterates the importance of thinking deeply about who is your specific customer, and not just within food service in general, but within the specific verticals, and how do you tailor your approach for different verticals, or take tailored approaches to really succeed, for instance, in K through 12, by understanding, what are the unique needs that this vertical has, and how can we make it easy for them to adopt our product. So I would encourage you to build relationships with chefs across those verticals so you can figure out where do you have product market fit, and then refine your marketing and positioning around that. So yeah.
Yeah, so valuable. I love that specificity, and yeah, doing the work of really investigating, especially K through 12, what those nutritional guidelines are. There's a lot more red tape in that segment than maybe corporate dining or campus and university. And I love that, thinking about, just because a particular food service segment or operator works for your strategy doesn't mean the reverse is true. So really doing your homework before is so important. And I think to that, and kind of also bouncing off what Edwina said, and the playbook, and coming, not every operator that you're approaching, every food service company is going to be Jen, and super familiar with how to make plant-based foods taste, appear on menus as really delicious, and highlighting all of the, following all the best practices, highlighting the origin of the dish and the ingredients, as opposed to really calling out what is not in the dish. Like, what was the example? Like meatless,
vegan meatless
meat-free
meatloaf.
vegan cutlet. Meatless meatloaf, something like that. Is you're screaming what's not there, as opposed to highlighting, maybe it's a lentil meatloaf, maybe it's using an extruded pea protein, and there's like a really fun name for that, really making these dishes seem appetizing. So in that theme, I'd like to think about, or GFI, we like to think about kind of this alt protein toolbox and the different tools that we have. And with the goal of a lot of these, obviously, plant-based companies and operators like Sodexo, and those part of the Cool Food Pledge who have these plant-based goals, being to for plant-based sales to increase, right? What are some other kind of tools in the plant-based toolbox that food service companies can use to increase plant-based sales? That might mean that a dish is not fully plant-based, but it's majority plant-based. Edwina and Jen, we kind of spoke about this earlier, so I'd love to hear from you first, Edwina.
Brilliant. I think I'm sort of still thinking about Alex's specificity point, and I might just sort of lean on that slightly, because, from a climate point of view, if you want a food service operator to consider your product find out what their climate target is in tons of CO2, find out what their main ingredient produces right now, and then bring your product and show them how much lower it is. And we've got a cool food calculator online, so you can plug your ingredients into that, and you can line them up against beef or against other kinds of animal-based proteins, and you can evidence that very easily. As I kind of said earlier, I think that because organizations are increasingly under pressure and expected to have some sort of climate commitments, and if you're a food service organization, food is going to be your biggest, piece of the pie, that your ability to be specific about the environmental solution you're bringing can be another string to your bow. So, yeah. I just thought I'd make that point. Marika, I'm sorry, because I was thinking about that. I wasn't concentrating on what you were saying. Could you just repeat the other?
Yeah, of course. And I'm just looking up the link for that cool food calculator. Maybe I'll try to find it, and we can maybe send that in the follow-up, because that's an awesome resource. I was asking about the other tools in the plant-based toolkit, and kind of what you and I were talking about with other strategies for increasing plant-based consumption, but maybe that involve using a little bit of animal-based products, reducing the size of the meat portion. Wanted to hear some of your thoughts around those techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, obviously I'm a big promoter of plant-rich options and plant-based products, but a lot of people like eating meat. So I think we need to work within that context and think about if your product is actually something that could be part of a dish that has some animal-based protein in there as well. It's important to think about how that will work. Will it blend in? Will it be very convenient for the operator? Will it be something that it's pre-packed and they just mix it through? Or how will it work out? So I think thinking about that convenience is really important. If we just concentrate on making plant-based products really appealing, we're not going to get to where we need to get to in terms of people are not going to make that big a jump in the time that we've got. So we need to be thinking more creatively about the people who love eating meat and integrating some of these products into some meat-based dishes. So I think that would be my plea where possible, because otherwise we will spend a huge amount of time over here, which is a brilliant space to be in, plant-rich, plant-based, but we risk kind of ignoring the fact that actually there's just a lot of beef still being eaten, and we're not thinking creatively enough about how to solve for that, the quantities in the dishes, and whether we can substitute in other ingredients.
Thank you. And I want to hear from you, Jen, in a second. I'm just thinking about like all of the information that plant-based companies want to give these operators, right? And I saw one company shared with me kind of their marketing and build cards that they give food service companies recipe suggestions, like really simple cooking instructions with photos and just like things that, again, the line cooks at these places, not everyone's a Jen. That's my mantra. Not everyone's a Jen. And just making it as easy as possible for these operators to make your products as delicious as possible and highlight them. So maybe if you are developing sample recipes, adding meat as garnish or something, having a more blended recipes in there is another potential solution or opportunity. Jen,
and maybe just making sure people know how to prepare it, so if your product is best seared, or if it's best roasted, or if there's a preparation technique, don't assume that people are going to know that is the case. I think some of these ingredients and these products are new. We've got people who've gone through a culinary tradition that doesn't necessarily celebrate or is used to these sorts of products. So, just make it as simple as possible. And if you have the time, kind of think about some of the recipes that are big sellers for that organization, and come with some creative solutions as to how you could lower the climate impact of that dish with a simple switch, and then bring your evidence to the table.
Do your homework. Not everyone's a Jen. We're building. I love this. All right, Jen, anything to add on? I know you work to reduce portion size and that type of thing. So I'd love to hear any tricks that it might be helpful for plant-based companies to also suggest when they're approaching a Sodexo or a different operator.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of a lot of common challenges that some plant-based brands face. I love that we did touch on the naming of items, because it's great if you have this wonderful product that tastes amazing, but if they're going to menu it as the vegan meatless X, it's probably not going to move and be a hot seller. We've tried to really dive deep into that and look at, leading with flavor, leading with what type of cuisine, calling out these descriptors, having this naming toolkit. And we've gone back and changed some things up. And Marika, you and I have had the conversation. It was a little more easier for us to do the whole food plant-based proteins. But then when we got to these alt products, I'm like, well, do we put them in quotation marks? Do we call it the brand name? Do we call it soy chicken X? And it's interesting, because I want, as I told you, I feel like we already have the buy-in from people who are looking to eat vegan or vegetarian plant-based. However, we want that larger audience acceptance, right? So what are they going to gravitate towards? So we're doing a lot of work around that. But if we take a look through like a non-commercial large food service company lens, that probably has like multiple sites over a vast region or nationwide, there could be challenges in aligning on knowing what product is approved too, and ready for ordering. So sometimes, unfortunately, I've seen and heard from accounts that didn't realize we brought in a new product to solve for X, or we had new recipes developed with a product that solves for Y. So for us, understanding this specific challenge, this past year, our campus segment created the Campus Alt Product Playbook. That's a long-winded name, but it includes like plant-based companies with their specific products that are approved, and along with some call outs of that specific product. It has pictures, identifiers, the recipes that have been created using these products, and most importantly, a link with the order form so that they can start ordering the correct approved product. And our hope is really to know that this becomes a seamless process in ordering and knowing where these products can be utilized throughout their menus. Because with these larger food service companies, we could bring something on and then we'll hear from someone saying, hey, I heard that an account doesn't know that we have this. So we're trying to streamline that with all this information in a compact location.
Yeah. So is the more information that you get from plant-based companies, is that better? Does that like help you more easily communicate to all of the different accounts and operators?
It truly does, because I've asked the companies, I'm like, give me your top 5 call outs. If you had to sell it to the accounts to flip the page and be like, oh, this is going to fill the need for what we're looking for. And a lot of that, sometimes someone's looking for a specific allergen friendly item, or maybe it's, something that has multiple applications or is shelf stable. They can look at those call outs and easily identify where they can start ordering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to the naming question too, and it's one that GFI is always looking at. We have lots of research showing like plant-based, it tests better than vegan, and we have research showing that if you can make a dish just sound really appealing, and then you indicate that it's vegan or vegetarian with just a little V symbol or a leaf, that increases sales. All of those strategies, and we're continuing to look at that as the category, as the industry is changing and evolving. And also the importance of, I think, when you're launching into food service, and Alex, you can certainly speak to this in a minute, of just like really testing out nomenclature, and like if you're just partnering with one small restaurant, really using that as testing ground to get some of this information that you can only learn from working with a food service company, right? Okay, what 5 dishes can this be used in if we're looking at a Mexican restaurant, because we have these grounds, and because we know that operators need to have multiple different dishes per product. So yeah, good to get that information directly from a small partner for sure. I'm realizing that we are just talking, and I'm not doing a good job of keeping track of time. So just going into the next question, I want to talk about some common pitfalls. And we can start with you, Alex. I'm curious kind of what some of the most common challenges that plant-based brands face when partnering with food service companies. And what are some strategies that can really help them overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, it's a great question, Marika. When chatting with our chefs, they raised a number of challenges they faced. We heard things around availability. So, of course, an operator is going to be reluctant to work with a new vendor. And so problem solving that before you approach a new food service operator and letting them know how they're going to be able to get your product and making sure it's easily accessible, or if you can drop ship at a reasonable price, coming with a solution there. There's going to be questions. And I think one of the hidden objectives, or maybe not so hidden for some operators, is like the level of processing in the ingredients list. And so being transparent about that and being able to hit those things head on if you have a good answer there is valuable. We heard things about price point, of course. And so that's a challenge in this industry, but especially when there's inherent uncertainty or you're doing something new or you're doing something experimental. And so whatever you can do to lower that barrier to get started, or to speak in, some of the terms I was chatting around earlier around, hey, this is going to actually have a good ROI because you're going to drive in more traffic. You're going to hold on to more of your guests. You're going to be able to charge a higher premium. And so that's going to flow straight to your bottom line. I think in general, there's a theme kind of emerging here around anticipating needs and objections and identifying those in advance and coming with solutions. At the end of the day, food service operators are extremely busy people who have a long list of burning problems that they need to solve, and adding a new menu item isn't always going to be a burning problem. Oftentimes it's nice to have. And so whatever you can do to reduce those switching costs and reduce upfront work, or understanding that, hey, Jen's going to need to come and share this list with all of the chefs that she works with, providing that to her to make it as easy as possible for her to do that and save her some time in her day. Getting some big nods out of Jen on that.
Thank
is
you.
the kind of thing that's going to make it to lower the burden of the switch and to make it easier. And I do really like as well what Edwina was sharing around execution when it comes to identifying the best way to prepare your product. And so, offer instructions, meet with companies and staff to educate them on that product, make sure it's easy to use, do your homework to make sure it works in a commercial grade oven and in their workflows. So again, I think broad theme here around anticipating needs and objections and coming with solutions.
I love that. And yeah, I love it. Kind of also ties back to come understanding what problem you're solving for them.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Do your homework.
Yeah, do your homework. Not everyone's a Jen. I also think that distribution and how they're going to get the product and how much product they have was a really good call out, because I know, Jen, you've come across that too, where you try an amazing product and you're like, all right, what distributors do you work with? And the brand's like, we're still in R&D stages and we can't supply. So being really upfront about that, and it's great, right? It's great to start these conversations early and send samples, but really being upfront that we are not at a place where we can supply to Sodexo.
And it's okay to have that conversation. I feel like people are like, no, we'll be ready. And it's like, it's okay. Let's keep the conversation open and going. And when you're ready at that point, then let's sit down and do the sampling and do all the things correctly. It's perfectly fine. I mean, we talk with startups all the time, and I think it's actually a very, very fun part of my job. So it's having those honest conversations and really, again, how do you best be a resource for them? Do you have R&D to be able to help ideate that's going to help with recipe development? Do you have marketing around that? There's all these different types of resources that each operator is looking for, and everybody's going to be different. So it's having that, being equipped with those opportunities to say, hey, well, we do have this, or hey, I have some non-proprietary recipes that you might want to take a look at and get some inspiration, or can we help with ideation? So it's just sparking those conversations and being that resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of this information, you can sleuth and find this information online easily. Like, who's part of the Cool Food Pledge? What companies have these sustainability goals. Okay, that's a K through 12. Like, all right, then you can research what the nutritional requirements are. You can look at what's on the menu of a 2-unit Ethiopian restaurant in the Bay Area and see, okay, well, my product would actually perfectly fit into that. And I can come with these awesome strategies from WRI's handbook or playbook for how to make these as appealing as possible. So like you can find all that online. And then also in conversations like this that GFI hosts and other entities host as well. We're running out of time because I want to get to your questions, but I do want to talk about one more question for you all before we get there. Kind of about the role of chefs and culinary professionals and what role they play in the adoption of plant-based foods and how companies can really effectively engage with these stakeholders. I think we've gotten to this question a bit, but the reason I want to call it out is because it's kind of talking about two different things. We're talking about food service companies and the decision makers at food service companies. And then a lot of plant-based companies are looking to partner, alternative protein companies are looking to partner with chefs more as, to help them with palates resources, with formulation, also just to help promote their brands and help them kind of test out formulation and whatnot. So Alex, I'd ask you, because you also did all of this research with your chef panel, if you have any kind of, and then Jen, you're also a chef, some feedback or some tips for plant-based companies when they go to approach a chef and say, hey, I want you to partner with my brand. Starting with you, Alex.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I would say some tips for approaching that chef is to approach them early. We see earlier is better. When I mean by early, I mean earlier in your product development process. I mean, before you even have a product, I think it's great to do discovery with chefs to understand, like Jen said, what is the problem that you're solving? And so that's like a good initial step for you to be able to understand problems and define specs that you can then pass to your R&D team. From there, as you develop products, you can go back to chefs and say, hey, we're early and not ready to sell this, but I'd love you to look at this prototype, try it in a commercial grade kitchen, let me know how it works. So then you can improve your formulation and make your product durable enough and versatile enough to exist in multiple different types of kitchens. So using chef feedback throughout the product development process, such that when you're eventually ready to launch, you have a good, validated, ready to sell product. And then you should engage chefs to get feedback on, like, who is my target customer? Is this a K through 12 product? Is this a fine dining product? Is this fast casual? And what are the things those different operators care about? If I share my sales pitch with them or my cold email template or my sales guide, like what resonates, what's being communicated, and using that feedback really end to end from as early as possible in an iterative way is going to be able to land you in a better place and help you find that product market fit. I think one of our clients recently had a lot of success with this. So she had a product that she was relatively convinced was ready for launch, did a chef panel, and even in just a few chefs kind of found out and had a wake-up call where she had honest conversations with chefs who were no longer telling her, I'm too busy to look at this, or it's too expensive, but were actually taking the time to chat with her about her product and gave her critical formulation tips that she took seriously, and she made big changes to it. And now we're launching another chef panel to see, hey, do we think that this is now at a validation stage? And she's much more confident in it. And that was from like direct feedback that a chef gave her on a formulation in a 30-minute call after trying her product for an hour. So it doesn't need to be, big projects, but checking in iteratively and having those opportunities. We also do work in our restaurant pulse, or bring products into restaurants for consumers to try and to get that feedback. And we goes beyond just the sensory performance of product, but also like, what's the right way to menu this? Which dish concepts are resonating? And we've seen through some of our sales data that we have from restaurants that dish naming has a very big impact on velocity. So like we have one restaurant that had a sausage egg on their menu. They changed it to a maple sausage, egg, and cheese. That new maple sausage, egg, and cheese sold 40% higher velocity relative to the other items in that restaurant. And so I think sometimes it's tempting right when you get into the restaurant to say, all right, like the job's done, like we did it. They're going to put it on the menu however they want it. But that's almost like getting into another restaurant once because you're increasing your sales 40% within there. So I think broadly speaking here, I'd encourage you really to go end to end with chefs. They're a very valuable resource. Ultimately, they're your customer and decision maker for this market. And so you want to be able to use their feedback all the way from discovery to launch.
Love it. Thank you, Alex. So many good nuggets. I think it was Chef Spike on the GFC, the Good Food Conference panel that we had in September, who said, if you're a plant-based or if you're an alternative protein company and you're not working with a chef, you're doing it wrong. I think that was a direct quote. So I agree, starting early is really important. Want to dive into the Q&A unless there's anything burning. I know we didn't get to every question that we as panelists wanted to. Is there anything that any of you want to share that we didn't touch upon? No. Awesome. I feel like we need another session where Edwina just walks through, and I'm sure this exists online, all of the what did you say, did you say 19?
Oh, I'm not going to talk about 90 techniques, but there are 18 no regret ones. Yeah, I could.
Yeah, I know you're not going to, but I just can't stress it enough that it's an incredible playbook. And you should all take a look at it. So we're moving into the Q&A section. And thank you all for submitting so many wonderful questions. I will start with you, Edwina. This is a question about the Cool Food Pledge. And this person is wondering if there's any data available for how much the pledgees, so those who are part of who have made the Cool Food Pledge, substitute lower carbon meats. So I imagine like poultry instead of beef versus plant-based foods to meet their targets. Are you seeing, are you seeing them employ one of those techniques more than the other?
Well, what we do with our members is we ask them for their procurement data. So we ask them to tell us the volumes of the different kinds of foods they're buying. And then we run those foods through the Cool Food calculator in order to calculate the climate footprint of the different ingredients. And then we show them a pie chart that says, hey, this is the variety of what you're buying, and this is the implication of that. And what happens is a really big aha moment where they see beef and lamb being a very low proportion of the volume of food procured, but actually a massive part of the climate footprint. So by looking at that pie chart, they can easily see the what the quantities of the different food types have in terms of their climate footprints, and they can model out substitutions or changes. Our ethos is to shift away from high climate impact foods towards low climate impact foods, and the easiest way to do that is to serve less animal-based products as a whole group. But we are, living in a world where there is a huge overconsumption of ruminant meat, particularly. So it is important to try and drive that down. What we love to see is people choosing to eat plants rather than those high climate impact foods. So short answer is, yeah, people can do that. They can model out all sorts of scenarios. And we're keen to see lots of organizations embrace the plant-rich options, and then also the kind of quantity of meat that they are putting, even if they're still serving meat, which of course loads of food service organizations do and will for a long time to come, thinking about, well, how much meat do I actually have to put in this dish so that it's still tasty? And one of my favorite no regret techniques in the playbook is around blending, and it's thinking about ground beef, or minced meat as we call it in the UK and Ireland, and blending that with other ingredients like mushrooms, and thinking about how to do that. I think this just slightly touches on one of the points you made, Marika, which is just thinking about supply, and maybe Jen made it too. So, if a chef is sitting in a position of authority and has autonomy and control over what's being created, and the food is being created from scratch, brilliant. They can decide what quantity of mushrooms they put in there. If you're buying it in a patty already, what you need is a brilliant supplier who can actually give you that product at scale, so that you can then make that switch over. And that switch is huge. If you can change, a beef burger to a beef mushroom burger, the emissions reduction is massive. So that's why it's one of my favorites, and I thought I had to give it a plug.
Thank you.
Edwin, I want to jump in quickly. So Palette is recently doing a lot of research in what we're calling like a plant-rich space or blended space of these hybrid products. And we're just working with an organization called Nectar, which is doing really phenomenal research on doing taste tests across all these products, identifying the right way to launch them, understanding how consumers are reacting to that concept. And so that's definitely something I have to share. And I would encourage folks to keep an eye out for if they're interested, is checking out Nectar's website and looking into some of those, this new emerging category around plant-rich products.
Brilliant. Thanks. I'll check it out.
Awesome plug. Yeah, Nectar and with Alex just did a webinar showing that sensory research. So and I think that's on their website, right? Free of charge. So folks should take a look at that for sure. It's a really exceptional resource. And thank you, Edwina. Is there a list on your website of the companies and institutions that have made the Cool Food Pledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So coolfood.org, if you scroll down on the main page, you'll see all the institutions that are in membership.
Awesome. So that's great for plant-based companies looking for potentially mission-aligned operators. Great research.
Absolutely. Use the science, you know what I mean? So I think it would be a little bit lazy to kind of go, hey, you're in the cool food movement, so here's my product, don't you want to? And I don't think anyone would do that, but I think it would be really powerful to then kind of take it a step further and look at, okay, what are the climate commitments? How much emissions do you want to reduce? What does the implication of your product mean when people use it at scale? So really do your homework and do some scenario planning. I think that would, I don't know, Jen, but I think that would really impress people when they come to the table. It's like, okay, this person has really thought about where we make our money and how we make our money and the kind of future we want to build in terms of our sustainability credentials. So, that intelligence wouldn't be ignored. It would certainly be appreciated.
Appreciated for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Looking through, and we had some people also pre-submit questions, so I want to make sure we're giving them some attention too. I think this question is best for you, Jen. So this person asked, are food service directors and purchasers more inclined to seek plant-based meat as a versatile component ingredient, such as a 4-pound chunk of chicken, or a meal-ready option like breaded chicken, or a meal-ready option like breaded chicken nuggets? How do they balance the need for versatility versus convenience in their purchasing decisions? Understanding that this varies across different segments of food service, but Sodexo specifically, how do you kind of weigh those?
Yeah, it's really all about balance, right? Because there is a need for both of them. Obviously, when we have the larger size portions of bulk, I'll call it, like when we have the bulk ground plant-based beef or crumbles or something like that, we can obviously have the flexibility to use that in multiple menu applications. And it's probably very highly likely that you'll get more recipes developed with that because there's that flexibility piece. However, we do have opportunities to have more ready to make, ready to utilize, like the chicken nuggets that you spoke of. And there's a place for that as well. So it's just finding that balance within. But if you have a very, very specific product that really lends itself to a small amount of the menu mix, that's where it gets a little tricky, because there's been products that I've seen, Marika, that I've absolutely loved, but I'm like, yeah, we don't serve a lot of this in campus, whether it's animal or plant, the version. So that's where it's like knowing the audience of, especially for large commercial food service, the segment that you're in as well. But yeah.
Like an octopus alternative. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how many.
yeah.
We didn't have that in my dining room.
Oysters.
Yeah. Awesome. Very helpful. I was at a conference, a chef conference last week, and there was a healthcare company presenting, and they said it's the rule of 5s. And I don't know if this is the same for everyone, every operator, probably not, but they want for any given ingredient, whether that's a ready to eat chicken nugget or a ground beef substitute or whatnot, they need 5 recipes, minimum of 5 recipes that it can go into. That's their rule. So I imagine
that's great. And I mean, that helps movement too, right? If your recipe is only going to show up once every month, you're not getting the sales. So if you have that flexibility, or can at least strategize, if you have a ready to use product, how do we get that in? How do we infuse that into those menus?
Exactly. And yeah, it goes back to providing examples of recipes, all the different ways that your products can be used. Awesome. All right. This next question is for Ben, if you want to come on camera, Ben, about the data. And we got a couple questions about this. Seems like some questions around what is meant by taste. So do we know what consumers mean by taste? Like is it the lack of meat taste, which is if they're missing? Is it that there's an unpleasant taste? Is it that it's just their perception of what these products might taste like? I don't know if we know the answer to this from the dig insights, but if I imagine, yeah, if there's any info you can share to help answer that question around taste. And I know it differs across different research, but the ones you shared.
Yeah, for sure. I think in survey research and kind of these general barrier questions, you see options like taste, texture, maybe even flavor, pretty broad things that I think consumers, when responding, can interpret, differently. So I think it gives us that sort of data, I think, gives us good direction in terms of, what's top of mind and how are consumers thinking about it. Maybe they're thinking about the total taste experience when they see taste, or maybe they're thinking about a very specific thing. That's kind of hard to tell from a survey, but I think, sensory study and more specific tastes and research is maybe where we can get more into that. Alex, I know you just kind of mentioned that with palate, so I'm not sure if you have more to add there, but that's what I would say from that survey specifically, and other survey data we see that kind of highlights taste.
Yeah, so I do. We've done research across the plant-based ecosystem of products to understand, like, the deep level, what is driving and having a big impact on overall liking. And so we see it with specific products where you have a weird aftertaste or an off taste that's going to really negatively impact a liking of your product. And you want to make sure you're avoiding those off notes. But the general theme for this industry is that we need bolder flavors and bolder texture profiles in our products that are closer to meat. And so we see products that need to be juicier, that consumers want to have a meatier flavor, and that often translates into saltier, smokier, those types of attributes. So I think there's a general push for product flavor profiles and texture profiles to be bolder and closer to meat.
Really helpful. Edwina, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a geeky kind of point on the taste. People don't really know what they mean when they say taste. So actually, one of the techniques that's coming out of the playbook is really important, is aromas and scents, and how you can actually enhance people's perception of what they're tasting by the smells around them. Now, that's not a no regret strategy, simply because it's not yet kind of loved by industry. So the no regret set are backed by academic research and loved by industry, or seen as feasible. But what I would say is that it scored very highly in the trials and the research that's happened. So it's just a matter of time, I think, before industry sort of cottons onto it and grabs a hold of it. So yeah, just to flag that as well. And then what Alex is saying about meaty, smoky, all those adjectives then can play into what Jen is saying about the naming, so you think about this from end to end. And, it's not just about the taste, it's about the anticipation of the taste through the way it's described, and then the aromas that you smell as you walk into the room, and then the texture and the taste, and then et cetera, et cetera. So just to say that it can all kind of build up to a great complete picture.
I love that. Yeah, taste. There's so many surveys, and it's just like taste. It's a very complex question that we're asking. A lot goes into our perception of flavor, our experience of flavor. So really grateful to the several people who asked for more specificity around that question. That was a great one. All right. Price. So in terms of priorities in food service, how high on the list of priority is cost parity between plant-based options and their conventional kind of counterparts? I will pass this to Jen first, I think.
I mean, it's always going to be one of the top talking points, right, for discussion. But I mean, when we look at it we have a unique situation in the campus segment, especially with residential dining. You swipe a card, you get in and you kind of have that golden corral, anything you care to eat, dining hall facility. So this opportunity of a blended average in plate costs can come up in conversation, right? So maybe we have a higher menu item at one station, but something's a little lower, and it's that blended average as a roll up. But price is always going to be top of mind, along with distribution, along with taste, along with how many applications. It's not just going to be above one thing. It's the whole package of how does this work seamlessly into my accounts.
Yes, understandable. And I don't want any like specifics, but I'm curious if there are, if you've found any kind of ingredients, any plant-based ingredients that are actually cheaper than their conventional counterparts. So you don't need to give any specific examples, but I know I was just talking to a chef who said that the price of cream is really, really high right now. It's just like through the roof. And so he's using old rice. He's like blending old rice because it has that creamy kind of texture.
Yeah.
And he's cutting his cream with that. So is there anything like that you've come across?
It has shocked my supply team on a couple of occasions that they've come back and they're like, hey, did we know that X is actually cheaper than the animal version? And it's been a pleasant surprise and a pleasant conversation to have with supply. So yeah, that kind of leads into this conversation of how do we work around defaults, and kind of what Ben spoke to with the default veg strategy that we piloted in fall of 2022. There's conversations now of saying, like, what if this plant-based version was the default? What would that look like? How would that impact X, Y, and Z? So there's some interesting conversations starting to happen that make me wildly excited.
Very cool. Yeah, I love the idea of like just plant-based eggs being used across an entire dining hall as a binder and all baked ingredients.
Right.
Or sorry,
What if it was
baked goods.
just plant-based mayo, whether it goes on a plant-based sandwich or it goes on an animal-based sandwich? What if, that there's some fun conversations that we can start to talk about.
Exactly. And just there are a bunch of questions here for you, Jen. As we suspected, because everyone wants to partner with Sodexo. But curious how nutrition comes into play, because you talked about about taste, about price. Specifically with campus, how do you think about nutrition?
Yeah, we actually have a program called Mindful, which is one of our healthier, still indulgent, but our healthier guidelines. It has to meet a certain criteria for us to label that mindful, and we're always looking at nutrition as well. But we make sure that we have this nice inclusive menu that has people who are looking for those healthier options, and then there's people like me who are looking for milkshakes and a juicy plant burger. So we want to make sure that we have all of these options available for when our students are looking to dine.
Thank you. All right. It's hard for me to look at these questions and listen to you and think about so bear with me here. I'm not sure if I think this is a good question, and I don't know who wants to answer it, if anyone, and I can, but I think it's good to think about. So obviously, GFI is focused on all alternative proteins, and we're talking about plant-based right now because of our recent report, and also that's the majority of what is in food service right now and on the market. But this person is primarily focused on the cultivated meat space. Obviously, we're a ways away from this type of, this products being used in food service on a large scale. But they're curious what panelists believe will be the same and what will be different from plant-based meat. And I assume they're meaning, and correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, in terms of like communicating with consumers, kind of the value proposition, the value proposition of cultivated meat, or maybe like, menuing it. and what the interest will be there. I don't know if any of you have looked at the cultivated meat space. I know a couple of you have maybe tried products, but anyone want to share thoughts on that?
I think I tried it with you, Marika, in San Francisco, didn't I? Yeah, that was fun. I can start and kick it off. We've had some intense conversations around the cell cultivated meat space. You know, it's very interesting to us. I've had the chance to sample. I think there's opportunity. Obviously, I guess my head goes to how do we market this and menu it, because it is so unique, and especially with the identifiers. And for me in the campus segment, I have a captive audience of 18 to 24-year-olds, some who are away from home for the first time ever in their life. And how do we make sure that we're being upfront and transparent about them, but it's also information that's easily digestible? Because I've had some conversations and some presentations, and I'm like, I'll tell you, it's delicious. I have no idea what I'm eating. Like, I mean, so how do we get that information across that our students and our consumers can understand it easily?
So Palette does a grocery store test where we'll bring products onto retail shelves long before they've ever actually launched to retail, like often just like mock packaging, and it'll look totally real on the shelf. But it's actually just a retail test. We'll do like A/B testing and things like that. And I want to give an open offer to anybody who has a cultivated product and wants to do this test with a cultivated product with like a fake package for a pilot scale test. I would cover the cost of that. I just really want to see what will happen. So if you have a cultivated product, feel free to contact me. I'm just dying to know, and I'll have to circle back with the group here to see what we learn.
I love that.
I kind of want to know too.
Thanks, Alex. That's very cool. Yeah, I think obviously GFI is doing a lot. We have lots of webinars on cultivated meat, and I know we've shared a lot of existing consumer research. It's hard to, you know, conduct consumer research on products that are not on the market yet. So everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. And I think there are really different value propositions for plant-based meat than cultivated meat. And certainly highlighting the deliciousness and staying away from calling out what is not in these products or on these dishes is, I think, still going to be applicable. And a lot of, probably a lot of the techniques in the playbook could be applicable as well. But definitely different value propositions for sure. All right. Let's see. We only have one more minute left. And I was listening to you all, so I wasn't focused on what question to ask next. Bear with me for a minute. Okay, another kind of technical one. I think there are a lot of really good questions for you, Jen, about just like timelines and all this stuff. And I guess this last one I'd want to ask is, what does the typical kind of product development, or I guess that would be menu development process, look like for Sodexo? What are the stages and the time frame from concept to commercialization? I think from that, I'd want you to ask, like, all right, if you're starting a conversation with a plant-based company, like, what does that cycle look like? And if everything goes perfect and they've come knowing that not everyone's a Jen, even though you're Jen, doing their homework, and it, you know, meets it, their product solves one of Sodexo's problems, what's kind of the average time frame they're looking at?
That's a really hard answer.
Right.
I mean, it's not, I don't know if we have like a set timeline, right? But there's going to be all these protocols in place and these conversations that need to be had. And sometimes information is given quickly and we can move to the next step. And sometimes things take longer than expected, or there's more challenges along the way. But I mean, usually starting the conversations and the samples, that's a good place to obviously start. Once that goes in, it typically goes to supply to look and review at pricing and distribution. One of the things I would I would offer up is to get and understand the scope of where this product is going to live within the menu. Is it going to have development? Because if there's development, that may be a longer process than something that's just ready to use and get out there at the grill station. Or if there's recipes that need to be developed, then we have ideations, we have testing, we have to get it uploaded into our systems for nutritionals. So that process tends to be longer. But just knowing that all up ahead, those are questions that you could certainly ask when saying, hey, this is fantastic. What are we kind of looking at? Where do you think this is going to live?
Yeah, great information. Sorry for throwing that one at you at the
No,
end.
that's fantastic.
Thank
It's a
you
great
all
question.
for answering tough questions and engaging in this conversation. We are going to close it out because this is supposed to end like 2 minutes ago, but thank you so much to our panelists for joining us, and to Ben for sharing the data, Kimberly behind the scenes making everything work, and to all of our incredible attendees for being so engaged. And I'm seeing connections made in the chat, emails being shared. I'll reiterate, we're going to email you all some contact information for these panelists and the organizations and companies they represent. And the recording of this webinar will be in there. And all of our Business Evolved Protein webinars are on our YouTube channel. So take a look at that report that we recently published that Ben shared data from. So thank you all. I hope you have a good rest of your day, night, etc. And we'll see you next month for our next Business Evolved Proteins.